I have to tell you how utterly impressed. I'm just sitting here going, I don't even know why I'm here. Y'all are doing awesome work. Let me just talk to you for a second before I kind of go into some other things. I come from Louisiana and lived there for 41 years, moved to Tennessee in 2019. When I moved here, I thought I was moving to a more conservative state. Who knew? And all of a sudden, I'm seeing the same things that happened in Louisiana happening here. You're just a little bit behind where we were at. The first thing, let me just kind of tell you, is you have in Tennessee, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for calling someone out, but I think we're just past where we have to call people out. Your commissioner of education is the female version of the guy we had running Louisiana's school system. He came from New York City. Mayor Bloomberg was he appointed John White. John White came into our state and he said all the same things that I'm hearing here. Sorry. He said all the same things that I'm hearing. We have to embrace, we have to transform, we have to raise the standards, we have to have better scores. Louisiana's at the bottom, we need to raise, it's just a lot of the same language that I'm hearing here. Same thing with the wellness. You have the wellness bill, or we had the wellness bill, you had the well checks. Okay. Well, in Louisiana in 2014, we fought a bill. And what that bill would do, and this is some of the things that you need to pay attention to, because this isn't just education. This is kind of across all of your children's life, essentially. From early childhood, in Louisiana, we have birth to 5 standards, literally, a document this thick. Birth to 5 standards, where they look at infants and have a standard that an infant should reach. And we also have the daycares are under the Department of Education, or they were at one point, and they had a quality rating. And these are things you need to be paying attention to. A quality rating is not a quality of a daycare. It's how much you are in line with state requirements. That's how you get your quality rating. So where you as a parent would say quality to you is someone is there with your child, is taking care of your child, and this, that, and the other. Their quality is, are you following the state guidelines? In other words, what you see as quality and what they see as quality are 2 different things. So a lot of what's going on here right now, Louisiana has already gone through it. The one thing that I find incredibly different from Louisiana is you. The amount of pushback that I see in Tennessee is astronomically different from what I saw in Louisiana. And the parents in Louisiana fought hard in Common Core, but not hard enough. And then it fell apart. And when it fell apart, and when they disengaged because they became disenfranchised, they became disillusioned, they didn't think they could get over the barrier, the State Department of Education and the legislature ran rampant all over them. And let me give you an example. This very day, today, I'm still connected to Louisiana. That's where a lot of my friends and family are. They still contact me for research and things like that, although I need you guys because, man, y'all are awesome. This deep dive team, I need to be in on that stuff because I can only deep dive so far. But, man, if I had an army in Louisiana, we could have stormed the gates, man. And so, and the thing about it is I'm on both sides. In other words, I was in education and have been for 30 years. This is my 30th year. I spent 20 years in the classroom directly. I didn't go into administration until after that because I loved being in the classroom with my students and I didn't want to give that up. I enjoyed it. And then I went into, retired to run for State Board of Education, in which all the foundations from across this country put money in and just basically took the election for all of these foundational candidates. Y'all are nodding, which I'm thinking you probably have this problem here too. Gates Foundation, Broad Foundation, yeah. And so I retired and then helped to begin a private school. A pastor contacted me and said, we've got to take our kids back. And so we worked together. I consulted with them. We created a private school and based it on the classical model of education. It's not fully classical the way I wish it were fully classical, but it's a lot better than what they have in the district. And we started out with 27 students the first year, and within 3 semesters, we're over 100. And what that tells you is people are hungry for better education. Sorry, excuse me. But today, my phone started blowing up. So as I'm preparing to come here, the phone starts ding, ding, ding. I got like 30 text messages because I'm in like a little group text. They were talking about a bill today in Louisiana in which they want to drop the mandatory compulsory education age from 7 years old to 5 years old in order to bring those kids into the system earlier. And the people that are promoting that are not from the left or the right, they're together. It is a Republican majority in the Senate and a Republican majority in the House, and the bill passed. And the same people that we fought against in the Common Core battle are the same people who went up there and were promoting doing this, because the whole idea is to get your kids in the system as early as possible. At the end of that conversation at the legislature, one of the legislators said, next year, we're going to put forth a bill to bring it to 4 years old. This is the kind of stuff you've got to pay attention. Every year, our homeschool group, believe it or not, stays on top of it. We have a huge homeschool group. I looked in Tennessee, and I don't see your Tennessee homeschool group as big on Facebook. We have about 13,000 people on that Facebook page. And what they do is they divide the legislation up. At the beginning of the legislative session, they go in and they pull every bill that deals with children, well-being, education, or all of that. They divide it up between their groups. They read it, and then they start funneling information to the homeschool parents, because unlike public school parents, and that's I'm not being derogatory, but it just is something that happens in Louisiana, the homeschool parents are rabidly protective of their rights. And so they will send, I think Senator Measles said she got 1,400 text messages, emails, and voice, a phone call. That's a lot of people. That got her attention, and I believe she voted against it. So here's one of the things I would recommend is that you have a group of people who are watching those bills, because what you will have, and what I've noticed you have, I don't notice it quite as much as I did in Louisiana because I'm just now getting involved in the legislative work in this state, but you will have Williamson Strong. You'll have in Louisiana Council for a Better Louisiana. You will have the Louisiana School Board Association. It's the same group, just different names. So you have that. And so those are the kind of things that in Louisiana, once those parents got disillusioned, they weren't engaging anymore. And here's what you've got to do. When you get up to that point where you're disillusioned and you throw your hands up and you think it's not going to work, and you ask yourself this question: what would the Lord want me to do? Would he want me to sit down and say, I give up? Because had those parents doubled down and done it even more, it would have been like a tidal wave. It would have been. And as long as you keep the pressure on, and that's what you're going to have to do, you're going to have to keep the pressure on them. I've been doing this, speaking to groups, and actually don't know how I got involved in this. I was going to be a professor. Who knew? And then my husband said, no, I think God created this for you because you'd have gotten fired from university. which is true when I started looking at what they required. Some of the things that I would recommend, and I'm going to go into some other things as well, but one of the things I would recommend is FOIA. Do y'all know what FOIA is? Freedom of Information. I would start asking, the one thing that I think where a lot of this is coming in is through professional development. A lot of these professional development things that are going on, the diversity, equity, and inclusion. I actually say diversity, inclusion, and equity because the D-I-E, die, sounds a lot better to me. And so that's something that where you can have this group, these people are going to do the FOIA on this, and these people are going to do the FOIA on this. I recommend that you go into the law. I just pulled down the open meetings law, different here than it is in Louisiana. In Louisiana, you don't have to submit your questions prior to getting up to that microphone. You just get up to the microphone. The legislature, you don't allow public comment. At our legislature, they have to allow it. And we have cards, green cards, red cards, white cards. If you're for a bill and want to speak in testimony, you fill out that card and you put, I'm in support, and then you put, I want to speak, and then they have to let you speak, which is why our legislature sometimes has 10-hour meetings, especially when angry parents show up. The problem is that you have opponents, and those opponents are very well funded. Our joke was they have billionaires, we have bake sales. It's true, because they're funded from the elites. And that's really where a lot of the ideology comes from, is coming from the elites. And it's really an idea. And one of the things you need to make sure that you kind of ask, and I always say, think about what Jesus did, because I'm really in this battle because God called me into it. And God called me into this battle, 15 years ago. Not that I did kind of not want to go in that direction, and it was a conviction. But you really have to use Jesus's method of confrontation. Ask questions. Ask questions you know they can't answer, or they won't answer. Be ready for when they throw something at you, and I'm going to give you some things that happened when I was a teacher. I was asked to create an elective, so I created a locally initiated elective for at-risk students, because when they came up into high school, 9th grade is the year that we lose kids. Almost a huge percentage of the kids are not prepared from middle school coming into high school, and we lose them in 9th grade to drop out. So I created this locally initiated elective. And so I did all the work, sent it to the state approved it, came down, we implemented it. At the end of that first semester, they wanted results. And I'm like, research-wise, that's invalid. You don't throw out a result just because of this. There might be multiple things that are going on that affected how they responded. Granted, every kid passed their state test, but that still doesn't mean that was what created them passing the test. And so because of that, they dropped the program. In other words, if you can't show results, drop the program. That's what's going to happen, or what you're going to get. You're going to get them with these results things. Are they controlling variables, so to speak? So when they throw out that 60%, I believe you said 60% of the teachers want wit and wisdom, how many of them are coerced? Because I can tell you right now in Louisiana, we had a huge number of teachers that would contact me and contact our groups and contact, people they could trust to tell them, no, we don't. We don't approve of this, but if we open our mouths, we lose our jobs. That's really at the bottom line, is are they true believers or are they coerced? Those are the two things. You won't know until you talk to that individual teacher and you start asking questions. There's that question again. And you have to ask very specific questions. All right, do you support the idea that America is racist and it is in their DNA, in its DNA? Yes or no? Not, well, yes or no? Ask the question that you know needs an answer specifically. Because you can't come back here and do very generalized, because then they go into that canned answer that you get. One of the things that I would recommend also is form a relationship with those parents, with those teachers, as best you can. Now, how do I put this? We had a lot of Stepford teachers in Louisiana. Do y'all remember the Stepford Wives movie? How many of you are old enough? I'm my age. Do y'all remember what that was all about? We get rid of the ones who think for themselves, and we put in place the ones who do whatever we're told they're told to do. So we call them Stepford teachers. And so what we would see in the Stepford teachers is Common Core is good. Common Core is good. We called them bobbleheads too. Common Core is good. My students will be able to collaborate. My students will be able to think critically. Y'all know that? Have y'all heard that before? It's like nationally. So those are the kind of things that you're going to have to do. Number one, you're going to have to stay the course if you want to protect your children. And I ended up pulling my son out at 17 years of age from the district I taught in. I pulled my son out to homeschool. And this is what ended up happening. One of the books I would say to look at and be on the lookout for is Springboard. Springboard is College Board created. Springboard's president is, I just went blank, David Coleman. Is David Coleman, who was one of the main architects of Common Core. David Coleman he's also responsible for the rewriting of the SAT. He's also responsible for the rewriting of the advanced placement. Y'all children have advanced placement courses. The advanced placement United States history, APUSH. In 2014, if you download the 2014 document and go to World War II, there is no mention of Hitler. There's no mention of the Jews. There's no mention of concentration camps, D-Day, Normandy, etc. There is, however, a statement that says that when the bomb was dropped on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, that Americans started questioning their values. The National Association of Scholars, and I would recommend that you go to their website because they have a great deal of reports about a lot of this stuff on the National Association of Scholars. You can become a member of them, or you can just go to their website. They have a lot of webinars. A friend of mine out of Arkansas helped to create the report for the standards, the Next Generation Science Standards. She teaches nurses, and so she helped draft that report about the science standards. They also have social justice report. It's very long. You'll have to wade through it, but it has a lot of good information in it. And so essentially, make sure that you are well-versed in things that they think you're not, because essentially what you're looking at is an attitude of what the old days they called the cult of efficiency. And so what it is that these people who are in these positions, not everybody, those people who would fight, they don't fight. Those people who don't subscribe to this ideology are quiet because they know their jobs are on the line. You're going to be fighting against those who want to pat you on the head. And I was one of those people. My principal, how sweet. How sweet that you brought that up. We'll take that into consideration. Very condescending. One of the things you have to do is you have to be smarter than him. You just do. So when they say something like, well, 60% of the kids are reading better, the first question you would say is, by the end of the year, shouldn't they be? I had a teacher one time say, my kids are doing better after 3 months. And I'm like, I hope so. Because isn't that the point of being in a grade? Is that at the end of the grade, I love the Common Core standard. At the end of second grade, kids will be reading higher level books. Duh. Okay. So 60% of our students are reading at a higher level. How do you know? How do you know? Ask them that question. What metric are you using? What metric? Do you have the validity and reliability reports to support that metric? In other words, just because a teacher makes up, look, I made up tests all the time, that doesn't necessarily mean that a program is working, especially in research if you don't control for the variable. If you don't control for, first of all, if you give extra attention to something, it may be the extra attention that created the improvement, not the curriculum. So these are the kind of things that you need to be kind of paying attention to, is listen to those condescending words when they pat you on the head. They're reading at a 60%. Okay, well, let's talk about that. How do you know? I'd like a copy of that metric. I'd like a copy of the validity and reliability report. And if they don't give it to you, ding, ding, there's something wrong. I would also recommend that if your children come home, and I've recommended, it's one of the things that happened when my son came home. Now, he's in a district that I taught in, which was one of the top districts in our state. A state that's at the bottom, but still top district in the state. When I brought him home and I started doing diagnostic testing, he came, I got when you drop them, you get the grades. He had a B in Algebra 2. When I went to sign him up for a homeschool course out of one of the universities out of state, they said, oh, no, that information, that's actually Algebra 1 second half. So Louisiana was calling something Algebra 2 when it was actually Algebra 1 second half. Second half, I don't know how we got from Algebra 1 second half to Algebra 2, but again, that's the problem. Okay, so I then do diagnostic testing because he's not doing well in this class. And he had a B when I pulled him out. And so when I did the diagnostic testing, I found out my son was 2.5 years behind in math. I had to go back to middle school math and remediate my 17-year-old child. And you know that by the time they're 17, you're not going to get them to where they should have been because you're just going to try and make up the loss. And his ACT scores, of course, we read a lot because I was an English teacher. We read a lot, so his reading was fine. But his math score was so bad that it dropped his ACT score down to 23. And his other scores were really high. If it hadn't have been for the math score, he would have scored 25, 26 on the ACT. And I'm not a big ACT fan, so don't necessarily take that as anything great. But it would have changed his ACT score. So when you get your kids home, do some testing of your own. There are placement tests out there. There's some diagnostic tests out there that are free of charge. Or even do the CAT test, which is not the highest level test, but at least it gives you an idea, a listing of what they don't do well in. You can test your kids yourself and get an idea, because then whenever they say to you that your kids are doing well, go, well, according to this, I'm not. According to the CAT test, and that's not the highest test. Then you've got something to put in front of them. And that's just something I recommend to parents. Have them read to you. Give them a book you think that they should be able to read at that grade level. And have them read out loud to you. Not just read, but answer questions about what they're reading. And kind of feel what they're doing. Ask your kids questions about what they know about history. If you start doing that, you're going to get a feel for what it is they know, what they don't know, and what information they're being given, so that when the teacher says, oh, no, we're not teaching CRT, and your kid comes home and says, George Washington was a racist. Because I can tell you, I can spend days and days and days going over the type of curricula that I've been evaluating for years. Y'all are doing a great job on wit and wisdom. I'm going to try and come to that wit and wisdom thing. I want to hear, because it's hard for me to go through everything by myself. So I had to do kind of spot checks, knowing what I'm looking for. Springboard, for example. One of the things, and this is another thing, the federal government is sending money down for these curricula, and that's actually illegal, There are 3 federal statutes, one of them being when they created the Department of Education in 1979 under the Carter administration, there was a prohibition on the federal government influencing curricula, textbooks, teacher professional development, all of that. It's illegal. And nobody's challenging that. That's something that you need to be challenging. Contact your congressman and say, why are you not protesting this when this is in violation of 3 federal statutes? You've got an administration doing illegal things. Well, we can make a list, but sorry, I digress. But that's actually illegal. They are not supposed to be doing that. And so one of the things, I'm just kind of throwing some things at you, but I want to start going back all the way. I can go all the way back to the 1800s, and I'm not going to today. So I talked about some of it in the CRT 101 about the influence of the Marxist ideology. It's rampant. You can't tell me it's not in there. If you are a history buff, it would have been glaringly obvious that Marxism was being pulled through all these different curricula, and have been for a number of years, long before Common Core. It's something that I saw 20 years ago. And so in my classroom, I didn't use the textbook in the days when they didn't, tell the teachers they were too stupid and they had to use a script. They did try to do that in 2005 in Louisiana, and I went into my principal and I said, I'm not doing this, fire me. And he threw it in the garbage can and went, okay. And I went back to my classroom because I had a great principal who knew that it was garbage. And so I didn't use the textbooks. I used primary documents. If I used the textbook, it had to be something that was either a primary document or straight Shakespeare, for example, a straight Shakespeare play or something like that. A lot of times I did my own. I just created my own stuff because the stuff I was getting was worthless, unfortunately. When you get a grammar book that has grammar mistakes. Okay. So Common Core, what I want to talk about is Common Core is just an iteration of the same kind of stuff that they've done for years. The new math, the Common Core math, how many of y'all have dealt with that? Okay. Common Core math, you can actually go back to the 1950s and 60s and find the new math of the 1950s and 60s. And so we were trying to figure out, do we call it the old new math or the new old math or the new math old? We don't know. We were trying to figure it out. That is just a reiteration of the same stuff. They just repackage it and slap a new name on it, kind of like the Tennessee standards, Louisiana standards. I did an evaluation of the Louisiana standards for English, and there were a 3% change from the Common Core to the Louisiana standards. And those 3% changes weren't that they changed the standard, they just moved it from a grade, up or down a grade. And I made a huge report on it with all kinds of graphs on it, sent it to the legislators, and none of them. Just same way you're dealing with your school board. So Common Core was, the standards weren't the problem for me with Common Core. It was the fact that I knew who the people were because I had been studying No Child Left Behind and I'd been studying all these other things, and it was kind of the same people popping up in this. Bill Gates, Broad Foundation, okay, all the same people that are popping up, Student Achievement Partners, funded by Gates, all these people popping up. What concerned me was the stripping of the content. That created an avenue, a doorway, if you will, for all of these type of texts to come in, because now I have these vague standards, and I could use a telephone to teach some of these things, a telephone book to teach some of these things. So what happened was you had all of these standards stripped, the content stripped out. You didn't have to teach this or you didn't have to teach that. For example, in Louisiana, you had to teach certain text had to be taught. One of the things that kids aren't taught today is the Communist Manifesto. They don't read it. They don't read about why Marx, what Marx's ideas are, so that they can think about whether or not that works. They don't read the conflicting or the opposing things. They're getting one side of the idea, and they never get both sides. The one thing that I tried to do was give them both sides and then let them decide. I taught high school, so it's different from elementary. Let them decide how they're going to parse that information. It's not my job to make them think a certain way. That's not the job of education, and if a teacher thinks that way, then that teacher needs to get out of the classroom. I'm sorry. It just needs to happen. If you think that your job is to teach these kids to think a certain way, then you are not an educator. You are you're indoctrinating. You're not educating. And if a teacher doesn't understand that, then there's something that they've been taught that is extremely bad, because now you're talking Soviet-esque type of teacher education. And I can go into a whole thing on that. So with the opening of the door of Common Core, the next stepping stone or the next doorway was social-emotional learning. Social-emotional learning was moving education out of academic, intellectual-based education into psychological-based education. That's why it's so similar to the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union stripped, you should see they stripped science. They couldn't talk about certain scientific things because that would lead them into thinking a certain way. Computer programming was kept under a very tight rein because then you have problems with somebody who can manipulate the computer kind of thing. So, I mean, it's a fascinating thing to read. But social-emotional learning shifts. And there's a book, it is extremely dense. Okay, you have to wade through this book, but Beverly Eakman talked about this 20 years ago, in 1996, I believe. Beverly Eakman wrote the book, Cloning of the American Mind. Everything that you are seeing today, she has talked about in this book. And it is a dense book, but man, it will open your eyes to what's happening in your schools today better than anything that I've ever read, condensed in one book. So you have this idea of social-emotional learning, which, by the way, goes all the way back to John Dewey and the Frankfurt School and all of them, this idea of mindset, this idea of growth mindset. How many of you have heard of that one? The growth mindset. Have you ever read some of the things that the kids write under that? I have some examples that were sent to me, and one of the little girls wrote, "Thank you," and I don't know the young man's name, "Thank you, Bob. You demonstrated a great mindset." Do they even know what that means? Because they're being taught these things, and they don't even know what the words are. They don't even know. For example, in the Wit and Wisdom, those of you that done the deep dive, and you looked at the teacher where the kid's going to show whether or not that they understand something. And so they have, I understand injustice. Y'all seen that? Okay. Do you really think a second grader understands what they just said? And how often do you think they put a smiley face? Okay, so the social, that's the thing. Get them thinking social emotional. Get them tapping into their emotions. Get them feeling sad, angry, frustrated, because that's what they're being taught. I think I showed you that slide from Wit and Wisdom where it's all the negative emotions. There's another one, I'm trying to think, out of Utah. That's another website I would encourage you to look at as well, is Utah against Common Core. Y'all remember Dr. Gary Thompson? He's on there, but they have a lot of information on there. I'm not going to be able to go through a lot of the slides tonight, but there's a lot of things on there. And one of the things that they have on there, Oak Norton has been fighting Common Core. And he did a video on YouTube about one of the elementary school reading books. And in that book, one of the very first lessons was teaching the kids how to write a persuasive argument in favor of a social issue using emotional words, which is essentially creating little activists. And it's a really good little short clip. I think it's called Visions by Blasi. I can't remember the name. If you go and look up Oak Norton and Common Core, it'll come up on the YouTube. Really good video to show you how very suggestive these things are. So we're not learning to read stories and learning how to decode and those kind of things. We're learning how to be little social activists in this. So the social emotional learning was a stepping stone to critical race theory, because critical race theory bases itself in emotions. Critical race theories, I guess you would call, I don't even know if you can call it a theory as much as an ideology. It's a worldview, okay? So when you go back and you look at critical theory, so you can go all the way back to the Frankfurt School and look at critical theory, and then you come into postmodernism. And somebody, she was talking about, how do you argue with a leftist? How do you have a conversation? You have to understand the postmodern mind. The postmodern, how many of you have heard of deconstructing? Okay, that's part of the postmodern ideology, the postmodern theory. And so the postmodern, there is no absolute truth, there's no objective truth, it's what you think truth is, you deconstruct, and yet they're talking about it as if it's truth. Wait a minute, you said there's no truth. If there's no truth, then what you're saying isn't true, right? You got to flip it back on them. Okay, and I like, it's not very nice. There's another book called Fault Lines by Vodi Bakum. How many of you know that one? Very good. He lays it out. He lays it out as a religion, because it really is like a religion. They have their tenets, they have their preachers, and they have their, core doctrine. But he says, I'd love to hit somebody. I'd love to hit somebody and then have them tell me that was wrong. And he goes, yeah, but you said there is no absolute truth. So if there's no absolute truth, my hitting you, to me, is right, to you. So who's right and who's wrong? Again, you're going to have to go and you're going to have to use some strategies when you're talking. I saw in your meeting that you had just recently where the room was packed with certain color shirts. White shirts, is that correct? Okay. We saw that in Louisiana a lot. I know that some of you think Bobby Jindal is just this awesome guy, and he is a very nice guy. He is. He's just not savvy in education. We had to really fight to get him to turn around, and by the time we got him to turn around, it was too late. It was the end of his term. He brought John White to our state, strike number one, but he did not engage in really looking at where this stuff came from. And so now what we have is we had a superintendent of education, you call it yours a commissioner. He came in and basically got rid of all of the local people, the Louisiana people, out of the Department of Education and brought into the Department of Education every state you can think of. When you went through the garage of the Department of Education, you had license plates from all over the country. He left, they're still there to carry on the work. One of the things that I would recommend is that you guys get into your Tennessee Department of Education website and start looking at the fact that you have a director of wellness. So if that wellness is kind of dying, why do you have a director of wellness? Did they get rid of that department? I think they were asked to, but I don't know if they did. Director of wellness. What about the critical race theory law that just passed? We know that Ms. Schwinn, the commissioner, is responsible for the oversight of that, correct? Who oversees her? considering that there is an equity playbook on the website, or that in the teacher work session, or the work section for teachers, like a little work, you know how they have these little kits and stuff for them to go through, that they have in there links outside to these organizations that have raised fists and that teach critical race theory. And again, you're not teaching critical race theory. You really need to say tenets of critical race theory. Because the argument is, we're not teaching critical race theory. No, you don't have a curriculum that says critical race theory, but you are teaching the tenets of it. The tenets being, and there's 4 major tenets, some people say 5, 4 major tenets. Racism is every day, everywhere. It's every day, everywhere. It's baked into America, into its DNA. You've heard that before. 2, convergence theory, that you're not going to engage in anti-racist behavior unless you as a white person get a benefit from it. So I am irredeemably racist because of the color of my skin. That's 2. The third one is that there is no absolute truth. Everything is relative. So therefore, logic, rational thinking, evidence, research is considered whiteness. And if you go to the Smithsonian, they actually they got in trouble for it and they took it down. But they had 2 pages of what whiteness looked like, including Christianity. Now, I want you to think about that. If I label Christianity as being white, then I'm saying that people of color, if they engage in Christianity, are engaging in whiteness. Do you see the problem with that? Okay. And then the last thing is, we don't have research. We don't have scientific method. We have storytelling. We have narratives. In other words, because someone of color has a different experience in life, that's true. What I say is not. And I can't understand what you went through because I'm not of your color, and therefore anything I say is false. Those are the 4 major tenets, and you can look those up. Dr. Bauckham talks about them in Fault Lines, and he does a really good job at really making it easy for you to look at. And so, could you put up the first page for me, please? One of the things I want you to see, there it is, okay. This is, how many of you have heard of brain pop? Does Williamson County have it? Okay. And you've seen this quote by the founder? Notice the quote here. My approach is that one cannot rely on adults. We cannot rely on adults. I teach the kids so that they will educate the adults. I am transferring the responsibility, think about that term, think about what he's just said, to the children. I'm transferring the responsibility of teaching adults to the children. And then compare it to a 1937 speech by Adolf Hitler. Don't tell me. If you're saying these words, don't tell me that you're not engaging in stuff that happened in the past. And that is, we have begun in the first place with the youth. You will never manage to do anything with the old idiots. It is pitting the youth against the adult. It is pitting parents against their children. I'm not making it up. You can go look up Hitler's 1937 speech, and you can go look up the fact that this Brain Pop founder said these words. If you go to the Brain Pop site and really dig around, you'll notice that they have Black Lives Matter, and I don't refer to it as Black Lives Matter. I refer to it as the organization that calls itself Black Lives Matter. And the reason for that is they were very good at putting that label on there so that if you say you're against Black Lives Matter, you're a racist. I always say the organization that calls itself Black Lives Matter. And I think they've lost a lot of credibility in the last few months, especially with the money scandals that are coming out. If you could put up the second one for me, please. CASEL. I talked about social emotional learning. What was it you were told about social emotional learning, why we needed it? Anybody? Your kids would learn how to be good kids. They would learn how to monitor their emotions. They would learn how to engage with other people. CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning, gets a lot of money from a lot of people, including the federal government. If you go to the US DOE website and you put that in, you will get a plethora of documents on CASEL. CASEL at the beginning said, oh no, this isn't about anything other than helping children have some grit and perseverance and all of these things. By the way, if you've ever looked at the US DOE document called Grit and Tenacity, you'll find out that they're going to monitor your biometrics. They're going to put little bracelets on your kids. According to this document, everybody called me a little tin hat person. I'm like, I didn't make the document, they did. This is their document. Oh, by the way, they took it down. But see, we learned a long time ago to download everything. So we downloaded a copy of it. And I think it's on like page 56 or something like that. You have pictures of biometric things on their eyes, little wristbands to see. And by the way, do you know what that is when they put those little wristbands on their arms? That's a lie detector. Yeah, it's a little, if you look at the little, the way in which they describe it, the way that you find out whether someone's engaging is the change in their biometrics, like their heart rate or they sweat a little bit. Well, that's a lie detector. And they put them, in fact, I think Memphis did a trial of these little bracelets, and it's meant to see if children were engaging in their lessons. Well, as a teacher, I didn't need a little mechanism to tell me whether they were engaging. If little Johnny was doing this, I don't think he's listening. And I would walk over and say, hi, and startle him. Okay. It's not, if you're a good teacher, you were already doing social emotional learning. You didn't need a curriculum. You were already seeing a kid come in the door. I did this every day for 20 years. They would come through the door, and if Mary was coming through the door with a different demeanor than she did the day before, something's going on. And I'm going to find out, and I'm going to deal with it. And if I think it's bad enough, I'm going to take it to the counselor and say, I think there's something going on. We already had that stuff in place, and good teachers were already doing it. They did not need the government and foundations and nonprofits to come in and sell their snake oil to people so that we can manage kids' emotions. Okay? If you were a good teacher, you were already doing it. Here, CASEL has changed its framework in the last, I would say 6 months. They changed the framework. And notice that it is no longer about just controlling their emotions anymore. It's about transformation. Do you see it? We've changed the framework from just helping kids to be resilient, helping them to get perseverance, to social justice. Can you put the next one up for me, please? I'm not going to be able to go through this because it's, number one, really small, and number two, really long. This is on the Utah, Utah. They don't say like Tennesseans, Utahns, okay. Utahns for Against Common Core has this, and it's basically a list of things that you can do with the subversive teaching. And so Mr. Oak Norton, put this together. I was so thrilled when he let me have it. I'm part of a national group, and we're a private group because of the same reason you guys keep things private, is we don't want to get our strategies out there. But I'm connected to all kinds of states through this group, and so I get some good stuff that I can share. I asked permission first, but he allowed me to share this with you, and it's on their website. You can go there, and they have some forms on that website that I would recommend that you go look at. So one of the forms has to do with CSE. Now, I've done multiple presentations on comprehensive sex education. It is not biological sex education. Comprehensive sex education, if you dig down deep, comes out of the Kinsey books, which you don't even want to read. It'll make you nauseous. But basically, comprehensive sex education is deviant behavior. It is teaching children how to have multiple partners, how to have... I won't go into it because it's pretty debauch, but you can look up comprehensive sex education. I think Stop CSE has a video, goes into detail. That's a good place to go and look at it. But part of this, guys, you have to understand, it's not separate. CRT, the idea of social emotional learning, the idea that there is no truth, there is no objective truth, no absolute truth, is this idea of bringing in sexual behavior because you're breaking down the moral fiber of the child. So you can't just look at CRT. Don't get distracted. That's what happened in Louisiana. We got distracted. And one of the things I heard someone say, give me some examples. You know what I'm talking about? Well, if you're upset, give me some examples. They threw that at us too. And one of the things that happened, I had a legislator look at me, he goes, what standard don't you like? I said, better yet, why don't you tell me the standard you do like, how it's different from the one we had before, and how you think that standard is going to do better than the standard before yours now. Because I just started throwing questions at him. Don't let them lock you into that. What is it you don't like about the curriculum? Better yet, tell me what you do like. What do you like? What is it in second grade module 2, the civil rights unit, that you like? Make them tell you what they like about that. And then ask them, so what you're saying is if I immerse my child in 7 weeks, was it 7 weeks for you? Wow. It was 7 weeks for the teacher that talked to me. For 7 weeks. Okay. At the end of 7 weeks, what is it you want the kids to understand? What is your rationale for this unit? And give me specifics of what it is you want this child to be able to do at the end of this unit. To be able to understand and be able to do at the end of this unit. Ask them to tell you specifically what that is. Because I don't know how you go through 7 to 9 weeks in that unit and not come out the other side having some severe problems with race. And I mean, these are second graders. They're not going to see it the way an adult sees it. And that's the problem. You have adults using the platform of a second grade curriculum to forward their ideology, to forward their solutions. And by the way, those solutions are social engineering. You can go all the way back to John Dewey. John Dewey in the early 1900s said the school was to be used for social and political re-engineering of, re-engineering society. What did the Soviets say? Schools will be used to re-engineer the society. It's the same thing. And when people want to throw at me, oh, you're being, hysterical, you're a tinfoil hat wearer. Okay, tell me what you think they'll learn at the end of this. I think I showed you in the CRT the third grade module where they would do the Starry Messenger, and every one of those lessons had a line or a word that church bad, church bad, church bad, church bad, church bad. Said different ways, but the same idea, right? What did you think the kids would think at the end of that? Make them go to the end and tell you what it is that you want the kids. Now, if you're going to say, I want the kids to read better, how does that help them read better if there's no phonics in there? How does that make them read better? Notice that they're having, and that's another question I would ask them. There's not a lot of phonics in the Wit and Wisdom. Are you having to buy another curriculum for phonics? Are you even teaching phonics? Okay? And they'll say, well, we believe, and I'm sure you've heard this too, we believe that if you immerse children in authentic literature, how many of you have heard that one? Take this is what I do. Take a page of Russian literature and set it down in front of them and say, well, if I immerse you in this, will you read better? And see what their reaction is. Because that's what you're doing when you set something down in front of a child who does not know the symbols, who does not know what the sound of the symbols are, or the blends, or the diphthongs, or how they come together to form words, and how there's semantics and stylistic things that are involved, that there are ways in which we speak in America that's different than you speak in Mexico and Honduras. I had a friend of mine who was trying to teach me Spanish, bless her heart. I'm old, and so it was just really hard to teach an old dog. I'm trying. I'm learning Hebrew, I'm learning Russian, and I lost Russian because it's been a while, so I'm doing all these languages. The problem is if you don't know the coding system, and they're teaching it as pictographs. Okay, so when I do a word like dog, D-O-G, and I don't teach the child D-O-G, I don't teach them the phonics and break the code, if you will, but I teach them the word. How many words are in the English language? A lot. How many are they going to be able to memorize in order to be able to read well? So what you're going to find, and I'm probably going to be saying something you don't already know, is when your child's reading to you, that all of a sudden they throw a word out that has nothing to do with the word. You're going, where did you get that? Because it doesn't even start with the same letter. That word doesn't even start. You have something like pony, and you have something like horse, and the child says pony because they're looking up at the picture, not at the word. Or you'll have something like Lincoln Logs. I mean, they just throw things out, and you're like, I had my son do that, and I was like, what are you doing? like that's not even on the page. Okay, we got to work on this. And so that's the kind of problem you're going to have with the whole language, okay? So again, all of this stripping of academics makes it difficult for the child. Now, one of the things that he talks about in this subversiveness is you need to reiterate to your children that you make the rules, not the teacher. The problem that we have had in the past, I'm one of them. I grew up in a time period when you could pretty much trust the teacher. I grew up in a time period when my mother said, if that teacher says jump, you better jump. And if you get in trouble with that teacher, you're going to get in trouble at home. The problem is we don't have the same kind of teachers today. And I'm not bashing teachers. I was one and still am one, okay? But are you an educator or an indoctrinator? There's two different things. If you're an educator, then you're willing to be taught. I never, ever felt threatened when one of my students came to me and said, I think you're wrong. Okay, well, what did I do wrong? I would tell my students, if you prove me wrong, I'll give you bonus points. Because that makes them think. And it also makes them double check me. It makes them fact check the things that I say. In high school, I tell them, fact check me. And if I'm wrong, I'll give you some wow points. And so that's another thing. If a teacher is truly a lifelong learner and you bring something to her, she should be willing to hear what you say. If she's not, or he is not willing to hear what you say, there's a problem. There's a problem because they're locked in rigid to something. And so whole language, for whatever reason, a lot of these teachers, and I bought into that years ago. I bought into it too because that's what I was taught at the College of Education. But when I worked with my students, because I cared about my students, and I'm not saying they don't, but a lot of these teachers have been, I just had a child, well, she's a child to me, a young lady came out of the College of Education in Louisiana in elementary ed and was telling her grandmother, who I'd been speaking with, Common Core is awesome, Common Core is great, Common Core is, the same, okay. And she said, well, darling, how do you know they're better standards? And she stopped dead, looked her grandmother in the eye, and she said, because they told me. That's not critical thinking. You're just accepting what someone told you without fact checking. One of the things I would encourage you to do with your kids is to fact check. If they're taught something in class that you feel is like George Washington is horrible, go and find something that is in opposition to that and have them read it. And I would recommend, primary documents, not somebody who's going to give accolades to George Washington. Because the bottom line is George Washington had problems just like every one of us did. He did things, but one of the things that you'll find with George Washington, and even the King of England said that he was an honorable man. Okay, so that's the kind of thing. Have your kids fact check. And so on this website, they have a wonderful form for the sexuality, because in Tennessee, you just had that bill signed about that the parents can opt out of. They have a great long list of a form with a long list of you may not do this stuff with my kid. And it's already there for you. You can print it out. You can sign it. It's already there for you. And that's on Utah against Common Core. Utah against Common Core. That is going to give you a list in the center, kind of like the first page, of all of the organizations who support comprehensive sex education. SECUS, Planned Parenthood, Answer. I mean, there's a whole list of those people, and those names I would write down, because when you see people who are attached to those groups, you will know, because almost every one of those groups funnel back up to Planned Parenthood. Almost every one of them are basically collaborators with Planned Parenthood. And so they give you a list on that document. And the other document that they give you on this document here is Subversive Teaching. And they've already spelled it out. They've written down, my child may not engage in, and they go through a whole list of stuff already laid out for you so that you can just sign it and send it in. One of the things in if you have high school students, in the Springboard text, they have these social emotional surveys. That's another thing. You're not supposed to be doing surveys. Now, let me rephrase that. If you get federal dollars, because this is a federal law, if you get federal dollars for this program that they're using, they're not allowed to do surveys. They're not allowed to do those kind of things. Another document I would recommend that you read is from Jane Robbins and Karen Ephraim, and it's the Nanny State. If you put in Karen Ephraim and Nanny State, the document should come up. One of the things that they will try to tell you, and I'm sure they're telling you, is your children will do better. Social emotional learning is going to create better academics. The social emotional learning is going to create smarter kids. How many of you have heard that one? Okay. They do an excellent job. They have like 300 references in this document. They have referenced 300 things in this document. You'll find a lot of the social emotional learning will reference like one thing or two things. They reference in this report about 300 different studies and different people that they're referencing. One of the things that they like to, and Castle's in there, by the way, you can learn a little bit about Castle through that document. One of the things that's in that document is the fact that most of that research is ambiguous. Most of the research on social emotional learning did not test students' academics. Most of it was done, like 50% of it was done in elementary school, which does not tell us how it relates to high school. Now, what does that mean? If you look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, they call it the nation's report card. You know how every year they say Tennessee is 35th in the nation? It's from that test. And if you look at that, you will notice that in elementary school, the kids seem to do really well. Not great, but they're up higher. Middle school, they might bump up a little or down a little bit, but by high school, they're down here. So recently, they did a science, now this is nationally, they don't have it for Tennessee for science. Now they do for reading and they do for English and for math, they have it by state. But for science and history, it's kind of national. They just do a national score. And I think it was 13% of high school students were proficient in science. Now, I want you to think about that. How many kids are not proficient? That's a huge, huge amount of kids who are not proficient. So while they'll tell you, oh, the kids are doing great here, I always say, how are they doing here? Because your teacher in second grade will be saying, my students are doing really well in my classroom. That's great. How do they do the next year? When I was asked to teach high school juniors and seniors, especially seniors, and I was asked to do dual enrollment for college level composition, one of the first things I did is I went to the university and I talked to the university and I said, okay, I'm going to be teaching this. What is it when they come to you they're not doing well in? I'm not looking at just my class. I'm looking at the fact that they're going to be gone from my class. One of the things I would tell my students is, by the end of the year, I need to be obsolete in your life. By the end of the year, I need to be obsolete in your life. In other words, you have gotten what you need from me and you can move on and you don't need me anymore, which is funny because by the end of the year, I had one of my students going, we got this, we don't need you. I said, okay, I'm going to go in the corner and pout. Okay. But it was great. It was great. I was teasing with them, but it was great that they didn't need me anymore. So I went up to the university. What do they come to you? What is the biggest problem you have when they come to you? What are some things you think I need to work on with these students to prepare them to be in your English department whenever they leave here? What are they doing at your school to make sure that there is cohesion between grades? Why is it that when kids leave middle school and they hit high school, there's so many who are not doing well? And it's not that the teachers aren't teaching their heart out. A lot of times they are. But you can be rocking in a rocking chair and using a whole lot of energy but getting nowhere. What are you doing to make sure that there's cohesion across grades? Is your child doing okay this year instead of last year? You got to look at those different things. Next one for me, please. Go ahead, next one. Okay, this, just to let you know the number, I think. Yeah, if you go and look, it says new on the back side, but it does tell you the chapter 49 is your education chapter. All your education laws fall under 49, and then they fall into different areas. This is the one that has to do with your child learning about gender fluidity and things like that. If you go to Utah against Common Core, pull down that document, that form, and then just fill it out because that form goes into all of this stuff. Another thing I would recommend is having your children, tell them, you're not to do any surveys, and if they're young, you're going to have to tell them what that is. You're going to have to show them what that is because they're young and they don't know. You're not to answer any surveys. You're not to answer personal questions about our family. You're not to, if they ask you if we have guns in our home, you're going to have to tell them that because they trust their teachers. The problem is you don't know who you can trust as a teacher. And it's sad. It makes me sad for my profession that this is where we're at, okay? But they could, and let me give you an example from high school. Common Core, one of the foundational tenets of Common Core comes from it's called New Criticism. We talked about the deconstruction and all of that. New Criticism, there's a tenet or a strategy within New Criticism called close reading. How many of you know what that is? Okay. Close reading I've used for decades. It's a great strategy when it's used appropriately, okay? It helps the kids slow down and it helps them to hone in on semantics. It helps them to hone in on meaning in a way that if they're zooming through the book, they don't get, okay? So I like close reading. However, the problem with close reading is that the Common Core, David Coleman, who pulled this together, the four corners of the page. You don't go outside the four corners of the page. In fact, I was looking at Amplify. I've been analyzing Amplify. I don't know if y'all have Amplify here in the middle school or high school. No? Okay, Amplify is, same kind of company, just like Great Minds, which makes wit and wisdom, same kind of ideology. Basically, they give you this document and then they tell the teachers, don't tell the kids where this came from. Let the document stand by itself. So one of the examples, not in Amplify, but in another one, another curriculum was the Gettysburg Address. And it says, don't tell the students who wrote it or what it's about. Just let them read it. And they can deconstruct it and they can analyze and then they can come up with their own meaning. The problem with that is The opening line is 77 years. Well, if you take the year that Abraham Lincoln wrote that and you minus 77 years, you come to the year that the Declaration of Independence was signed. And the thing about that is if he's speaking to an audience and he's telling them, I'm talking about the Declaration of Independence, then the whole body of that text wraps around the ideas that were inculcated in that document. But you're telling the kids, don't look at that. So how does that play out? That's kind of okay, maybe we can live with that. One of my friends told me she told me when we were fighting Common Core and she pulled her kids out and began to homeschool them. Her son was given 3 articles. All 3 articles were on gun control. And so what he had to do is he had to write a response, but he could only stay within the 4 corners of the 3 documents. So what can you say about guns if you have to remain within the three documents? Do you see how subtly you're pushing towards an outcome? Well, he decided he wasn't going to do that because he was an avid hunter. And so he wrote from his hunting experience, he wrote from the articles, he pulled from the articles, and then he used some other outside resources to write, which, by the way, is actually called critical thinking. And he wrote this, and he got a poor grade on it. And the reason for the poor grade was he didn't stay within the 4 corners of the page. Do you see the subtle? That's why Common Core is a problem. There is an ideology, and they'll look at you, no, you don't have to do that. Yes, you do. If you look at David Coleman and Susan Pimentel wrote the guideline for the textbook companies. They wrote the guideline for the textbook companies if they wanted to be Common Core certified. And you can read in that document where they tell you, don't do this, do this. Don't do this, do this. And that's what the publishers did. Pearson, Amplify, all of them. What does that do? Give me 4 corners of the page, and I only give you, a good example is a child got, in North Louisiana, got 6 documents on China's one-child policy. Not one of those documents mentioned abortion. One of the documents talked about how great it was to be an only child. Do you see the slant? In other words, I tell people all the time, don't tell me that I have a choice just because I can go forward, backward, side to side when the maze leads me out in one direction. That's where we're at right now. You're telling me I have a choice. They would tell us all the time, well, the school districts have a choice to choose whatever curriculum they want to choose. Oh, yeah, forward, backward, side, but there is an out. Okay, I go out this one direction. And that's what I told the assistant superintendent, and she, constant. How many of you get this? They just repeat it. Because if they repeat it enough, maybe you'll leave them alone. Okay? Guess what? Repeat it again. And again. And again. And then say, I'm not only going to repeat it to you again, I'm going to repeat it to 5 of my neighbors. And then I'm going to have them repeat it to 5 of their neighbors. And we're just going to keep repeating it until you open your ears and you listen to what we're saying. Because the idea that we have here is that the school system owns your kid. And you are the one that takes them home and feeds them until the next day kind of thing. And that is not, our country was not built on that. If you go to the Supreme Court, one of the things the Supreme Court said is that the parents are the ultimate caretakers of the child. And we've gotten to this point where we're thinking the state owns the child. What does that sound like? Sounds a whole lot like Soviet Union to me. Okay, next one. How many of you had to deal with remote learning? One of the problems across the nation, I don't know if you've had it here, but one of the problems is that when they saw, in Louisiana we had this, and we have a great attorney general, he's fighting it for this child, thank goodness. But the school district saw a BB gun in the background, and he got in trouble for that. This here is a document that, again, Utahns Against Common Core has on their website, in which it states, my home will not be, and it goes into, it's not an extension of the school, it goes into a lot of detail. A lot of people helped craft these. And instead of reinventing the wheel, go pick it up from them and make it your own. Okay, take out the Utah stuff and put in the Tennessee stuff and make it your own. But at least you've got a document you can kind of work with that's already created for you. I love that document because I love the fact that they go, my home doesn't become an extension of the school just because we're remote learning. They do it in much better language than that. The next one for me. How many of you know that there's a document on the Tennessee Department of Education website that tells you what all of the laws are that give you your rights and stuff? If you go to Tennessee Department of Education and you go to their website and you put in the title that you see up there, you got a document you can print out. And that way you can look through it and see what kind of things are already in the law. What is it that's already there for you that you can, when you go up, and one of the things, for example, in Louisiana, we had a lot of problems with the schools intimidating and bullying. There's no other way to put it. Intimidating, bullying, threatening to call DCS on them because they were trying to drop their kids and homeschool them. So we had to teach these parents to get the law, copy it. I would send them a copy of the law. I would tell them, highlight this section, go to the school and tell them, I would like a drop slip. And if they gave you any problems, you set the law down in front of them and say, the law says I have this right. Now, we can do this the nice way, or the next call we get is through my lawyer. I would also recommend, somebody said this earlier, there is no reporting. Like in North Carolina, they actually have created FACTS. The Bill Robertson is the lieutenant governor, and he created FACTS. And that is a reporting portal for any of this subversive kind of teaching so that the parents could go. If you have a chance, go look at it, and maybe you can talk to your legislator about pushing one for here. But I would recommend that every single time that you have something that you see that is going against the law or going against the teacher ethic code, either one of those, that you send a copy of that to the school board, to your school board member, and you CC all of your representatives. Your senator, your representative, all of them. CC it so they can see that you've CC'd. So that whoever at this district level sees that you've not only sent it to them, but you sent it up to the legislature. Because at that point, if you get enough of those up to the representative, they're going to start contacting the Department of Education and asking why this is not being handled. And that could be kind of some pressure on the Department of Education to move on some of these. And you have I don't know if you've seen the article, you have 350 teachers and administrators and educators who have signed a document saying they're not going to abide by the law. Have y'all seen that one? Find out who those teachers are. And if they're one of your teachers, I would go to that teacher and have a nice, polite conversation with them. Never get ugly. It doesn't do any good to get into a shouting match with somebody. It's not healthy. It upsets you. It upsets your children. It just doesn't help. Try to be as loving as you can possibly be, but firm. And if that teacher says, I'm not listening to you, say, thank you for your time, and then report that teacher. Now, one of the things that I'm talking about, I've suggested, I don't know if the legislator is going to listen, is you have to understand how the teacher licensure program works. It's not just in law, it's in rules and regulations according to the Department of Education and Board of Education and all of that, is if I've got to take it to the district and district does not take it to the board, is there a way for me to go straight to the board? And so I'm talking to some people, and so you talk to people. How do I report a violation of the teacher's code of ethics? And when are we going to address the teacher licensure? If this teacher is doing this and this teacher is deliberately saying, I'm not going to follow the law, should that teacher retain their license? Okay? We don't want to go after people. That's not what this is about. If you go after someone because you want to just stab them, first of all, should not be our heart. That should not be our heart. Our heart should be reconciliation. Our heart should be loving. But we also have our children. And one of the things that I would ask you to think about and to ask you to talk to your representatives and your school board members about, if you drip this into my child from kindergarten to 12th grade, what type of citizen are you expecting to come out at the end of that? Another thing you're going to hear, how many of you have heard this one? We've already spent $300,000 on this. How many of you have heard the money argument? Okay. We heard that a lot in my state too. One of the things I asked them is this. If a hospital received $300,000 worth of medication and they found out that there were several ingredients in that medication that was toxic, how would you feel if they decided to use it anyway because they spent $300,000 on it? I don't think anybody would say use it, but you're doing the same thing when you're dripping negativity, when you're dripping death, when you're dripping, I hate America, when you're dripping racism, and it's racism, by the way. Call it what it is. It's not anti-racist. It is neo-racist. And that's what you want to tell them. No. Let's talk about it like it is. Let's call it by its real name. It's neo-racism. When you tell someone that because of the color of their skin, that they have certain characteristics because they belong to that group, you are supporting racism. And don't back off of that. Don't back off. If they start, rah, you are supporting racism. Rah, you are supporting racism. Just say it over and over again. And they can scream all they want to. And you have also the meeting coming up. This is what happened in Louisiana. Be prepared for it. It's very likely to happen here if it hasn't already happened before, and I think it did with the white shirts. One of the things that happened was we knew that we were going to be looking at some bills on Common Core at the legislature. So the committee meeting had already been set up. I've been going to committee meetings for years. It was second nature to me. I knew what door to go in. I knew what to do. I knew where to go, etc. That particular day, all of the exits were being guarded by state troopers. And we were being moved to the front doors instead of the committee doors. However, all of these people were being allowed in. We weren't, but the people were. And what ended up happening was they were allowing these people in to fill up the committee rooms to keep us out. And it was horrid. It was the most, I looked at one of the state troopers, I said, I've been coming up here for years. I have never, ever seen a door. He was ashamed. You could tell that he had orders and he just kind of looked down. That kind of strategy is meant to shut you down. Call them out on it. Write articles about it. Put it out in the news. When you show up, if they deliberately block your ability to have your voice heard, get it out there. Get it out there over and over and over again. We actually had one of the most liberal people in the legislature come in. She was a senator, and she came in and she lambasted that committee for what it did. It's a long story, but they did some horrible things. And even the liberals were appalled. That says something, doesn't it? Okay, so anyway, next one. This is brain pop. This is brain pop. Do y'all notice this right here? Okay. You want to really ask them, okay, if my child is going through this, what is it that my child is supposed to come out the other side being, knowing, doing? What is it that my child should engage in? What is your vision for my child? Get them to say it. Get them to say out loud. If they say, we want it to be a better world, okay, define that for me. What does a better world look like for you? No racism. Okay, so you're telling me that teaching white kids that they are bad and that they are evil is going to create a better world? Because one of the things you have to understand about Marxism, it's never over. It's never over. There's always the oppressed, always the oppressor. And if you read D'Angelo, if you read Kendi, If you read these people who write the anti-racism books, how to be an anti-racist and is everyone really equal, all of these people who are promoting the tenets of critical race theory, if you look at what they write, they'll say continual lifetime, basically, analysis of your behavior. It's forever. It never ends. At the end of this, are we going to have a better world, yes or no? You see, that's what you've got to start asking them. Instead of getting in the weeds and saying that, well, this book and this book, you need to ask them, if you drip my kid this stuff for 13 years, actually, kindergarten through 12th grade, up into college, 4 more years, P20, that's what they call it, what does that look like in 20 years? What does that world look like? Because it looks a whole lot like Jim Crow to me. You're putting into place Jim Crow laws. You've just switched the group. And then what happens in 20 to 30 years? You have another group come in. And then we just do this over and over and over again. The whole point of this American experiment, and yes, we have made many missteps and we have done horrendous things, and I taught about those. I did not back off to those things. I taught them in a balanced way. This happened by these people back then. We did these things. How are we now? And I would ask my students that. I wouldn't draw them through the maze and have them come out at a point. We would look at Frederick Douglass and Phyllis Wheatley and Benjamin Banneker and all of these different people. We would look at Thomas Jefferson, read his autobiography where they talk about the fact that they were trying to get the slave issue handled in that time, not 100 years later. They hold up England as being we fought against the British. The British were better than the horrible slavish revolutionaries, yet we were pushing to get rid of slavery while the king in 1823 was still kind of promoting it in the Indies. Why? Because money. Okay? There's a lot of blame to go around, and we can look at it from every point, but you don't judge the past on today's ideology and today's knowledge. They didn't know those things back then. They didn't have the same mindset that we have. I like what Ian Rowe said. Ian Rowe is a black businessman. He also created some charter schools in New York to help. And one of the things he said is, when you know better, do better. When you know better, do better. Don't focus on the victimhood. Focus on the potential. Because if you tell a person of color, a little child, that the reason he can't do well is because of the color of his skin, then he never has a chance to reach his potential because he's being held down by that belief. And if you tell a white child that they're to blame for every bad thing that ever happened in history, you're going to create a lot of angst, and you're going to create problems with them forming relationships with other children because of the fact that they either feel like they're no good, they aren't worthy of that. You are telling them that they fall short over and over and over again. So those are the things that I would recommend. I hope that I haven't, because I can do that quite often. There's a lot of stuff that goes on that I could talk about and do it for days and days and days, which I won't do to you. But I hope that gives you some idea of some resources you can go to, some forms that you can download, and some ways in which you can engage with these legislators and with these district leaders. Make them show you the evidence. Don't take them at their word. They obviously have shown that their word is not the best. If they're lying to you or they're stonewalling you, then you have to ask yourself, are they really on your side? And if they're not, you either got to figure out how to get them on your side or you're going to have to replace them. I mean, there's really only two choices. Either they change and they kind of get with the program, or you find somebody else to do the job. And I hope that some of you will be looking at running in your district. And I know we're working in our district to try and get some good people on the ballot, so I hope that's what you're doing. Thank you so much for listening. You're awesome.